Hi there. Today I'm making a video on something very basic. It's meant for beginners, for people who are new, or people who might not understand the basic concept of sigils and how to make your own build. This is probably not for you if you're already more experienced player or if you're already making your own builds. This will go over the very basics in hopes to teach you how to create your own builds at a very basic level and then build up on it as a foundation. Instead of just sitting here in the bottom left corner, sitting around in Volker and talking about stuff, we're going to get a little bit of visual aid. So, with that being said, class is in session. Okay, let's start very basic. How does damage work in this game? First, I'm gonna go over the damage formula, and then we will go over multiplicators and stuff like that for the individual calculations of each. So first up, we have our base damage. I'm gonna call this BD, the base damage that gets multiplied by our crit, if applicable. Then our crit damage gets multiplied by our multiplier. I'm gonna just write X here for multipliers. And then we have elemental bonus. And then we have OD and BT, so overdrive and bloodthirst. And then we have supplemental damage. Okay, so here this is our basic formula. We have our base damage that gets multiplied by our critical. Then that gets multiplied by all our other multipliers that we have in our sigils and in our build. And then that gets multiplied by the elemental modifier if we hit the right element. This should be 20%. And then this gets reduced by overdrive and bloodthirst state. And at the very end, if you proc supplemental damage, we have 20% modifier of our entire damage that we did at the end. So how do these things result? Base damage, right? This is from our attack. Crit is from our critical hit, obviously. It multiplies this from our sigils, usually. This is from our right element, and then this is from enemy state, and this is again a sigil. So very important to note is multipliers always king. Flat tends to get worse as you get later in the game, but flat always gets applied first. So if you have like 100 attack in your character, and then let's say 20 attack from your attack power sigil, you would have 120. And only then, after all the flat attack is combined, gets multiplied by your attack multiplier. Okay. And this is basically what makes our base damage. And then this goes into crit. And let's talk real quick about crits. For the people who don't know, crit is not only a damage multiplier, but crit also makes it so your attacks always do their maximum roll. So if you have an attack that actually does not, in most cases, there are some exceptions, but most attacks, they have a roll. So they do, let's say, 80 to 100 damage. And what a crit does is, it will always maximize the roll. So it will always do the 100, and then it will multiply. So that is why crit is good, because not only does it make your damage more consistent and always do the highest amount, it then also multiplies it. And then this number here in turn gets multiplied by all the other stuff. And for the people who do not know, multiplication is really important. So if you have 100 and you multiply it by 1.2 and multiply it by 1.2 and multiply it by 1.2 yet again, this number is higher than if you were to multiply 100 by 1.6, right? Because in every step the number gets higher. So even though it might seem the same, like if you count together, right, it would be the same, but because every step increases the base number and then gets multiplied, gets something higher. So if you do this real quick here, right, if you multiply this by 1.2 and then by 1.2 and again by 1.2, we have 172. And down here we have 160. And this is the crux of the entire thing. And that is why stacking the same Sigils is really, really inefficient. Because if all you do is stack attack, but you get nothing else, then you lose out on the entire process of getting more multipliers. So what you want to do is you always want to spread out your Sigils. Basically, if you have the choice between stacking the same sigil again or using another sigil that is a multiplier, almost always the multiplier will be better, like just as a rule of thumb. And this is like the very, very basic. And that is also why supplemental damage is really, really strong, in my opinion, because supplemental damage will be calculated at the very end. And I've seen a comment saying, why would I use supplemental damage if I can just use the elemental damage sigil? And it's pretty simple, because supplemental damage applies after everything else. So here actually, I'm gonna make this red here. This is where our damage cap applies. And then, even though we are at our damage cap, this multiplies by 1.2, right? Because of element. And then this gets multiplied by whatever defensive status the enemy has. I cannot tell you the exact numbers for Overdrive and Bloodthirst, but Overdrive, it reduces your damage cap, minus cap, and Bloodthirst gives the enemy a huge defense boost, right? But then, whatever is left here at the end, all of this gets multiplied by supplemental damage again. And supplemental damage does not take into account basically your damage cap. Because, let's say after all this, you do 50,000 damage, and you proc supplemental damage. This will do an extra 20%, right? So supplemental damage is a proc. It's not guaranteed, it's a chance that you do 20% of whatever damage you dealt. And that would be 10,000 in that case. So this is an extra hit, but we would do with that one attack that we did 60,000 damage in total, even though our damage cap would be 50,000. And That's just because supplemental damage comes at the very last. And that is basically why supplemental damage, in my opinion, is really strong. And now that we have a basic idea how damage comes to be, we can start thinking about how do we want to build our sigils, right? So let's take a look. As I said before, critical hit is a very solid start. And the reason for that is not just because the sigils are very accessible, but also because stinger weapons exist. So stinger weapons give you a really high critical hit rate and critical hit damage by default, because it's a trait on the weapon themselves. And additionally to that, they also give you collection mastery in your masteries, right? That is also a lot of critical hit damage. And now we can think, what sigils do we use? So we want different multiplicators. So say we have stamina increasing our attack by a large amount. Then we have concentrated fire dealing our damage by a large amount. And then we obviously have critical damage increasing our damage by a large amount, right? And this is why damage skyrockets so much in endgame, because you have all these different multipliers. So if you were only to stack attack, like I've seen people, they thought that just getting a really high attack stat is really good. That's why it's not good, because you miss out on all these different multiplicators, as I gave in a brief example earlier. It's just better to have many steps, and that's why you should try to spread out. So let's go over a very basic build, and that will basically be applicable for everyone, okay? So first we start with critical hit rate. Everyone will probably use critical hit rate. Now there's some characters that have the luxury of using other means of critical hit rate. As example, on EO we could use Lucky Charge. So what Lucky Charge does is it boosts the critical hit rate of charge attacks, and EOS damages only charge attacks, so you can, in EOS case, get critical hit that way. It won't display it down below, but you can easily do the math in your head, right? And then we want to get some critical damage, very simple. You'll want some critical hit damage, of course. And then we start auto multipliers, ones that are easy for us to use. So as example, we could use stamina. Stamina is very basic, it's very accessible early in the game. What it does is it gives you a really big boost to attack if you're high HP. And in general, you want not to get hit anyway, right? So that's just basically rewarding you for playing well and not getting hit. And then we could use, let's say, a skilled assault, because if you're not yet at the damage cap, your skills might be very efficient. So with this, you can get a huge amount of damage on your skills. And you might use something like combo booster as an additional multiplier. I'm not exactly sure how a combo boost works. And depending on your character, like you, we could use charge attack, giving us another big boost, right? And then for ranged characters, we could use concentrated fire. And then we already have a lot of different multipliers, right? And that would already make our damage very high. So if instead of just having 5 different multipliers, you would just use 5 critical damage, you would get very little out of it. And that is basically just general building. And while there are many different characters, essentially most of them build almost the same. They might just use sigils with a different name because they have some fringe cases like concentrated fire, right? Do not be scared by the amount of different sigils there are in the game. Just go through your list and see how many different useful multipliers I can have. So, for example, there's things like Overdrive Assassin, right? That works only against enemies in Overdrive. So it's not really something that is consistently useful. If you take something like Concentrated Fire, that is consistently always useful, right? If your character can use it. And that is how you do a basic build. So we have all these. And then, of course, once you start getting damage cap, you will add damage cap for that, right? And then you will probably already be at the cap that you can do. And then you can take some utility sigils that you think might be useful for you. For EO, we might take Quick Charge because her attacks are a lot about charging. Now, this is also a multiplier, but the main reason is the utility, because charging a lot faster just makes the character a lot better, right? Because it's her main gameplay style. And that's just how you do a very, very basic build. You really don't need to overthink things at the beginning. Just try to get different effects. They will multiply each other. It's a lot more efficient. And then you're already good to go. That's really it. It's that simple. You really don't need to do more. And once you start getting more different types of sigils, and as you build on your foundations of what I teach you now, you can make your own thoughts about what might be useful for me. Like, how do I play? How does my character play? What do I do with my character? And then you just, you know, use effects that apply to that. Very simple. And now that you have the understanding on how damage works, how damage is calculated, and that multipliers are like the most important thing for builds, now you can start making your own thoughts about how I should build. As I said, it all depends a lot on how you play, but in general, damage is almost the same for every character. Nothing really changes too much. So yeah, that's it for the video. Have a nice day. Bye bye.